Good afternoon, dear students. My name is Желдибаева and I am a lecturer of educational program Pedagogy and Psychology. The name of our discipline is Pedagogical Psychology. And our first lecture is devoted to the pedagogical psychology as a science. So, as it has been mentioned before, pedagogical psychology is a branch of psychology that studies the laws and mechanisms of teaching and learning. And this diagram illustrates its key components and how they are interconnected. At the center, we see pedagogical psychology as an independent yet integrative field of science. It connects the study of psychological processes with the goals of education and teaching practice. Let's start with the subject matter. This area defines what pedagogical psychology studies: the mental processes, behaviors, and individual differences of learners in educational settings. It focuses on how students acquire knowledge, develop skills, and form attitudes through learning. Next, the relationship to education shows how pedagogical psychology supports the learning process. It provides scientific foundations for effective teaching methods, motivation strategies, classroom management, and student-teacher interaction. In other words, it helps teachers understand how and why students learn. The methods section refers to the tools and approaches used in research, such as observation, experiments, testing, and analysis of learning outcomes. These methods allow educators and researchers to identify patterns and improve teaching practices based on evidence. Finally, the objectives of pedagogical psychology are to improve the quality of education, develop the learner's personality, and support the holistic growth of students, intellectually, emotionally, and socially. Altogether, this scheme shows that pedagogical psychology serves as a bridge between theoretical knowledge of human psychology and practical tasks of education, helping teachers become not only educators but also researchers of their students' development. Subject of pedagogical psychology: facts, patterns, and mechanisms of human development, of socio-cultural experience, and changes caused by this process in the level of intellectual and personal development of the child as a subject of educational activities organized and managed by the teacher in different conditions. And also the processes and results of the influence of one person. It might be parents, teachers, any family members, other adults, or even peers, or in educational institutions on the formation of personality by Kazanskaya. So, pedagogical psychology is a branch of psychological science that contains knowledge and studies the problems of teaching and upbringing children, as well as psychological foundations of pedagogical activity of teachers, educators, parents, pedagogical groups, and collectives. A branch of psychological science that studies the regularities of the process of assimilation of social experience by individual in the conditions of the educational process. The science that studies personality changes in the process and result of training and upbringing. Now let's discuss the tasks of pedagogical psychology. So the first one is to disclosure of mechanisms and patterns of teaching and educating influence on the intellectual and personal development of the student. Determination of the laws and mechanisms of students' development of socio-cultural experience in structuring preservation in the individual consciousness of the student and use in various situations. Determination of the relationship between the level of intellectual and personal development of student and the forms and methods of teaching and educating influence in general. Determination of the features of organization and management of education educational activities and the impact of these processes on intellectual and personal development and educational and cognitive activity. So now it is clear that pedagogical psychology plays a key role in understanding how people learn and develop within educational environments. And concluding the previous information, this scheme illustrates the main tasks of pedagogical psychology, showing how it supports both learners and teachers in the learning process. At the center, we see pedagogical psychology as a science that studies the psychological foundation of education and upbringing. Around it, there are four major tasks that define its purpose and research areas. The first task is understanding learning processes. Pedagogical psychology investigates how students acquire, store, and apply knowledge, as well as what factors such as attention, memory, and perception influence their academic performance. By studying these processes, psychologists and teachers can create conditions that make learning more effective and engaging. The second task is studying personality development. This includes exploring how a learner's character, motivation, emotions, and self-esteem are formed and transformed in the educational environment. It helps teachers understand how to support students' emotional and moral growth alongside intellectual development. The third task is optimizing teaching methods. Pedagogical psychology aims to improve instructional approaches by applying psychological principles. For example, it studies how active learning, feedback, or individualization of instruction can increase student success and motivation. Finally, the fourth task is addressing educational challenges. This means finding solutions to problems such as low motivation, learning difficulties, conflicts between teachers and students, or adaptation issues. Pedagogical psychology offers strategies and psychological support to make the educational process healthier and more productive. It also studies the psychological foundation of teachers' activity, his or her individual psychological and professional qualities, skills, and abilities, identification of mechanisms and patterns of developmental learning, also determination of psychological basis of diagnostics of the level and quality of assimilation and their correlation with the federal state educational standard. Thank you very much for your attention.